Week 3 is underway tonight, and you know what that means. It's matchups that matter, where we give you guys all of the best information that you can use to set your fantasy football lineups. Over-unders, implied point totals, pace of play, offense, defensive, DVOA matchups, wide receiver, cornerback matchups, and all things in between to get you guys ready for your fantasy football matchups in Week 3. Let's start with the top 5 over-unders on the slate. Again, as I go through these, make sure you guys are keeping note of the players that you're deciding between in your start-sit decisions and determining, guys who are in higher scoring game environments, maybe giving them a point, so on and so forth. The highest over-under games on the slate this week: Arizona Cardinals, Detroit Lions, 51.5 point over-under. That is the highest one on the slate. Saints and Eagles, Cowboys and Ravens, Bengals and Washington on Monday night. And then Falcons and Kansas City Chiefs also expected to be higher scoring games. And then conversely, the Steelers and Chargers, Titans and Packers, Browns and Giants, Jets and Patriots tonight on Thursday Night Football. And then the Buccaneers and Broncos. Again, you probably want to steer clear of these games. If you have a lot of fantasy options in those games, you probably want to temper your expectations. And also, low over-under games are good to target for fantasy defenses as well. Implied point totals, you can see that the Bengals are actually the highest implied point total on the week against the Commanders on Monday night. So good news for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins if he's back, Zach Moss and company. Detroit Lions also up there, as they usually are, against the Cardinals this week. The New Orleans Saints finally getting some respect from Vegas. They are third in the implied point total against the Philadelphia Eagles. The 49ers against the Rams, expected to probably have a high-scoring game there as well. And then the Buffalo Bills going up against the Jaguars. That is actually the second Monday night game. We do have a Monday night doubleheader with the Jags and Bills and the Commanders and Bengals. The lowest implied point totals on the week. Again, if you have players on these teams, you probably want to temper expectations and only start absolute must plays like Ramondre Stevenson for the Patriots, or like Malik Neighbors for the Giants, like the Chargers with J.K. Dobbins. Again, the Carolina Panthers and Broncos, I would probably avoid starting players from these teams unless you absolutely had to. Let's talk about where the sharps are betting. So in addition to the over-unders, in addition to the implied point totals, we also want to know where the sharp money is going, because that can be indicative of which games are going to shoot out, which games are going to disappoint. Some of the sharp money is going towards this Cowboys and Baltimore Ravens game, 48.5 point over-under already. Over is catching 82% of the steam. Same goes with that Cardinals and Lions game, already the highest implied point total over-under on the entire slate, and the over is catching the steam there. Same with Vikings and Texans and the Falcons and Chiefs, and it looks like the Buccaneers and Broncos game expected to go over, even though it is a low total. And then some of the sharps being on the unders in these games. It looks like that Giants-Browns game, it's set up to be a bit of a snoozer. Colts and Bears, half decent total, but the under is catching the steam. The Bengals and Commanders on Monday night, already a high total, expected to potentially go under according to the sharp money. And then Rams, 49ers, also the same thing there. So speaking of points, we also want to know how many plays, offensive plays, are going to be run in a lot of these games. And a good way to know that is by checking the pace of play data of the two teams that are playing against each other. You can see some of the slowest pace of play games of the slate here. You got the Rams and 49ers, two of the slowest paced offenses in the NFL, run-heavy teams, potentially why that game is catching some steam on the under. The Bengals and Commanders, same thing. And also that Raiders and Panthers game, that Titans and Packers game, and the Buccaneers and Broncos game, already low totals, probably ones that you want to avoid if you can. And then some of the fastest paced games, you can see we do have some triple threats, which basically means it's a high over-under total. It's a fast-paced game, and also the sharps are taking the over. The Falcons and Chiefs is a triple threat this week. The Texans and the Vikings is a triple threat this week, and the Cowboys and Ravens are triple threats this week. So you definitely want to keep in mind that the players in those games are probably likely to overperform their expectations given the game environment that they're expected to be in. Now let's talk about some of the biggest advantages and disadvantages of the defensive DVOA versus the offensive DVOA. Again, the New Orleans Saints, the leaders in offensive DVOA in the NFL right now. They've gotten off to a monster start. They have the biggest advantage because they are playing a relatively bad defense, or a pretty bad defense, in the Philadelphia Eagles, especially on the back end. They have not been good this year, so the Saints have the highest advantage of DVOA this week. The Seahawks, the Bengals, the Bills, and the 49ers also following. Again, the Bengals being the one that appears to be getting back on track their next couple of games. It looks like that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, if he's back, appear to be in a good spot, so definitely go and buy low on those players as we talked about in the trade targets video. Some of the biggest disadvantages DVOA-wise, you see the Steelers, the Panthers, the Dolphins, especially without Tua Tagovailoa, the Broncos, and then even the Texans too, going up against a pretty strong defense against the Minnesota Vikings. Temper expectations / sit some of those players, especially for the Panthers and Broncos guys there. Let's talk about the wide receiver cornerback matchups. Of course, a lot of you guys love this segment of the show because you get to temper expectations or get excited about some of your fantasy wide receivers. Lots of shadow matchups this week. You guys can see all of them on the screen there. Tonight, we are expected to see Garrett Wilson versus Christian Gonzalez in a shadow matchup. Garrett Wilson, a guy that I really, really want to see have a better performance, but he also does go up against a tough corner. DK Metcalf kind of made Christian Gonzalez his bitch last week, but at the same time, Garrett Wilson not nearly as physical as DK Metcalf. It's possible that Christian Gonzalez does take him away to some degree. Justin Jefferson is expected to see Derek Stingley, but of course you start Jefferson anyway. Brandon Ayuk expected to see Tre'Davious White. I'd still be firing him up, no problem. Amari Cooper against Deontay Banks. He got absolutely wiped by Justin Jefferson in week 1, so I wouldn't be too concerned, although he did take away Terry McLaurin last week. Mike Evans versus Patrick Surtain. I would say of all corners, he's probably been the best in the NFL this year at shadow coverage, and it's good chance that Mike Evans has a down game in this one because physically he can kind of match Mike Evans. Probably in store for yet another big game from Chris Godwin. Quentin Johnson expected to get the Joey Porter treatment. He's been absolutely nails in shadow coverage this year as well. Xavier Worthy versus AJ Terrell. Also worth noting that in those games, Ladd McConkey in the slot against the Steelers slot corner and Rashee Rice in the slot against the Falcons slot corner. Very, very good matchups, especially knowing that some of their running mates have bad matchups on the outside. So keep that in mind. Moving into some of the downgrade matchups, the orange matchups here, you guys can see Patriots wide receivers, don't start any of them against the Jets corners tonight. Malik Neighbors, tough matchup. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, tough matchups. Jaden Reed and company, tough matchups for the Packers. And then Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, tough matchups against the Seahawks cornerbacks. And then some of the better matchups that you guys could probably expect better production than you're usually expecting from these guys. I already alluded to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They have a nails matchup against the Commanders corners. They've been dead last, stone worst against the pass in the NFL so far this year. Think of the game Mike Evans had in week 1. Chris Godwin had in week 1, and then Malik Neighbors had last week against the Commanders secondary. DJ Moore and Rome Odunze set to have a pretty decent matchup against the Colts. Marvin Harrison against the Lions cornerbacks. Devontae Adams versus primarily J.C. Horn and the Carolina Panthers cornerbacks. And then Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins expected to have a bit of a lighter matchup against the Packers corners as well. So moving off of all the matchup information, we'll go through our top quarterbacks and defensive streamers in a second here, but I do like to go through and help you guys set your flex spots. So the guys that I'm going to talk about here, as you guys know, are must-start running backs and wide receivers only that are ranked outside of my top 24. So any of the guys that I talk about here, if you have a locked and loaded, set it and forget it stud, like Devontae Smith or Malik Neighbors, obviously I'm not starting these guys over players like that. These are for those of you guys that are in deeper leagues who need some help with your flex spot. A lot of these players are in flex consideration because they are outside of my top 24 running backs and outside of my top 30 wide receivers. So a lot of these guys are probably guys that you're deciding between in your flex. So the first guy that I talk about in each case is always going to be the guy that I would start ahead. If you have, say, 1 and 3, you would start the guy who is number 1. Jaden Reed is one of my favorite flex options this week for starters. Jordan Love is 50-50 to play in this game, so there's actually a possibility he's going to be back. But even if it's Malik Willis again, Jaden Reed is heavily involved both as a runner and as a receiver. He was kind of locked out against the Colts as a receiver last week, but he did have some explosive plays on the ground. And of course, we all saw what he did in week 1 against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's just one of those guys that you're going to have to live with a little bit of the volatility, live with the idea that he's not necessarily going to be on the field every single play because he's more so the slot receiver. But with the Tennessee Titans, they have really strong outside corners. So L'Jarius Sneed is probably going to take away either Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, or Dontavian Wicks on any given play. So knowing that the slot production is up for grabs there with the Titans, I feel really good about Jaden Reed as a solid starter this week, and I think they're going to get him involved on the ground like we saw from them last week as well. Zach Moss versus the Washington Commanders, as I talked about, great game environment for the Cincinnati Bengals, good over-under, all that kind of stuff. Implied points are up there with the tops in the NFL this week. The workload is actually quite excellent for Zach Moss. He could be worth a buy low if you guys are running 0 and Hero RB builds where you just need running back production, because I think this will be a Bengals get-right game incoming. The defense is 32nd against the pass. T. Higgins might be back on the field. I think there's a good chance that Zach Moss finds the end zone, and the workload that we're seeing, as much as it pains entertains me as a Chase Brown bag holder. Looks pretty good, especially 82% of the snaps last week. So number 3 must-start flex option for me is Brian Thomas Jr. against the Buffalo Bills. The Jaguars have to make some changes. They've been running the ball like crazy, which is not philosophically what they've done in years past. They've traditionally been a more pass-heavy team, and the Bills' defense is definitely beatable through the air, and Brian Thomas has been outstanding when he's gotten opportunities. He's made big plays. He's scored touchdowns. I think the game plan for Jacksonville needs to be, let's throw the ball to Brian Thomas more often. I think they're going to drop a lot of shot plays for him, so I feel pretty good about his ability to kind of be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease this week against the Buffalo Bills, especially, the Jaguars don't want to drop to 0-3. You got to get your best players the ball in their hands, whether it's on screen passes or slant routes or deep shots, whatever the case is. I think this could be the Brian Thomas breakout game we've all been kind of waiting for. So definitely try and get him into your lineup this week. DeAndre Swift against the Indianapolis Colts is also on my must-starts list this week. I know he's been kind of bad so far. Actually, bad is an understatement. He's been 2 yards per carry type of running back, and the Bears' offense has been pretty unwatchable, especially the way that Caleb Williams has handled pressure. But Josh Jacobs killed this defense, the Indianapolis Colts, in last week's game, and Joe Mixon absolutely torched them on the ground in week 1. The Colts are allowing the most rushing yards in the NFL right now. If the Bears can't run the ball against the Indianapolis Colts, they will not be able to run the ball against anybody. So I do like DeAndre Swift to get loose for a long run in this game, maybe a long touchdown run, if they can get him schemed up. A lot of good plays here. Number 5 must-start player here is Zamir White versus the Carolina Panthers. Kamara was awesome against the Carolina Panthers defense in week 1. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards had a big game last week. I think they'll be more competitive with Andy Dalton on offense on the other side of the ball, but I do like the usage uptick for Zamir White. Antonio Pierce has been vocal about getting him the ball more. That Alexander Mattison week 1 blip on the radar, I do think that will probably not happen again. I think Zamir White is set to get 15, 20 carries in this game, and I feel good about his ability to find the end zone in a game environment like that. So, conversely, those were 5 must-start players at the wide receiver and running back spot. These are 5 must-sit players at the wide receiver and running back spot, guys that I think could disappoint you if you're hoping for some good production from them. Number 1, we have Javonte Williams against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I like the usage improvement in week 2. The offense, however, was not improved. The implied point total for the Broncos offense against the Bucs on the road this week is just 16.5 points. I don't love the matchup of the Buccaneers run defense, even without Vita Vea and some of the other great tackling players on our defense. We are still going to shut down the run first and foremost. They're going to make Bo Nix try and beat them, and he hasn't been able to do that in the first 2 weeks of the season so far. Javonte Williams is also the second lowest graded running back in the NFL in PFF rushing grade at just a 50.0 rushing grade right now. Only Ezekiel Elliott has been worse, so he is not really helping matters. He's not been a guy that's moving the needle as far as how he's been playing. And to be honest with Javonte Williams, I need to see him have a big game before I trust him in my lineup, because he has been pretty bad going back even to last year. The volume has always been a non-issue for Javonte. He gets the volume. He just can't do anything with it, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and honestly the last couple of years with Javonte Williams. So until he proves it on the field, he's not seeing my lineup. I think you guys should have better options out there. Number 2 guy that I also don't want to see my lineup is Christian Kirk. 82nd of 87 qualified wide receivers in PFF receiving grade. This matchup favors throwing, like I said, but I do think Brian Thomas' breakout game is coming, and I do think he is going to establish himself as the alpha going forward. If you can still sell Christian Kirk based on past season production, I would recommend doing that, but at the same time, he has not been good at all. So I don't imagine people will be beating your door down to go and buy Christian Kirk. I simply can't put him into my lineup until I see him playing better, because he is playing so poorly right now that he cannot be in your starting lineup. Number 3 must-sit players, Jerome Ford. The Browns integrated Deontay Foreman to the tune of 38% of the snaps last week and over 52% of the rushing attempts, and that was a big shock because Jerome Ford actually had a workhorse role in week 1, and we saw that dialed back. Now, I think against the Giants, it'll probably be a positive game script for the run, but given the fact that Deontay Foreman was as involved as he was last week, I don't think you can reasonably trust Jerome Ford at this point in time. Deontay Foreman was not heavily involved in week 1, and that's partially why Jerome Ford saw that kind of usage. Again, it could yo-yo back, and Jerome Ford could be the clear starter again, but until I see that, I don't want to put I don't want to put Jerome Ford into my lineup, and I just don't want to really trust a committee backfield in a bad offense right now. Number 4 must-sit player is Quentin Johnston, who of course was a big-time waiver ad for a lot of people this week. 4th lowest implied point total are the Chargers against the Steelers this week's game. Joey Porter is going to be on Quentin Johnston according to the Shadow Matrix, and I know he was a big-time waiver ad, and people might want to throw him into their lineup right away. I think he'll be decent going forward. He might have decent usage in this game. I just don't think he'll be overly efficient. I'm not counting on any big plays, any touchdowns against Joey Porter, who's been absolutely outstanding, probably an all-pro caliber cornerback to start the season this year. And if he's going to be on Quentin Johnston most of the game, I expect Ladd McConkey to do most of the damage through the air. And of course, we know this team loves to run the ball, and it's expected to be one of the lowest scoring games on the entire slate. So I'm not firing up Quentin Johnston, even though he was a hot waiver ad. Number 5 must-sit player is Courtland Sutton, who of course has a pretty easy matchup on paper. You can see the Bucs defense a little bit decimated with injuries, but the secondary, Zion McCollum, Jamel Dean, they're playing well. Courtland Sutton, 72nd ranked PFF receiver according to receiving grade out of 87 qualified. I expect Bo Nix to look quite frazzled yet again. He's looked pretty bad in his first 2 games, and the Bucs' exotic blitzes that Todd Bowles likes to throw at these rookie quarterbacks, I don't think that's going to be a remedy to the way that Bo Nix is playing right now. I think it's probably not going to be great for the Broncos passing offense, and as a result, I am not starting Courtland Sutton until further notice. So that wraps up my must-starts and my must-sits this week. Quarterback streamers, if you guys are looking for quarterback production because you have Jordan Love or you have a quarterback that's not really working out for you, it's weird to call Joe Burrow a quarterback streamer because he hasn't been one to this point in his career, but he probably is not heavily rostered in a lot of leagues. He's probably not heavily thought of in a lot of leagues because of how he's played. And maybe this is the type of buy low window that you could need for Joe Burrow to potentially be an every week starter for you going forward, because the Commanders are dead last pretty much across the board. Pass defense, DVOA, adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Their weighted average score in our matchup chart is basically the worst pass defense in the league. So Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense could get back on track this week, especially if T. Higgins is back on the field. The Detroit Lions, Atlanta Falcons, Jared Goff, and Kirk Cousins also profiled to be pretty good streaming quarterback options this week. If you guys are in need of a quarterback upgrade, Jared Goff is probably widely available. Kirk Cousins definitely widely available. I wouldn't mess with Kirk Cousins unless you're really screwed. Jared Goff should be the guy that you start over him in most cases, but I do think both of those guys are in good spots. As far as defensive streamers, you can see I have the Packers, the Seahawks, the 49ers, and the Buccaneers outlined as really good streaming options this week. I mean, the Packers going up against Will Levis, he's good for a couple bonehead plays a game. As I mentioned, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, exotic blitzes, the way that Bo Nix has played so far, I think they are one of the top 5 defenses on the week. 49ers and Seahawks might be heavily rostered with the way that those defenses are playing, but anytime I can pick on Stafford with no weapons or Skylar Thompson, I would definitely be willing to do that. And then kicker matchups, you can see Harrison Butker has the best matchup here. Patriots kicker tonight, also a very good matchup. And then Cairo Santos and Brandon Aubrey expect to be in really good spots as well. Brandon Aubrey is the number 1 kicker in fantasy, so I'm sure he's rostered. But all of those kickers listed there are in pretty good spots this week. So hopefully this Matchups That Matter video helped you guys set your fantasy lineups. Make sure to check out our TikTok. Over there, we have pick'ems going. If you guys want to tail the pick'em that I have going tonight on Thursday Night Football, definitely check out the link down below in the pinned comment to check out underdogfantasy.com. Use code FSE when you sign up, and you'll get up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you sign up and make your first deposit. You will also get our weekly start-sit rankings for the duration of the regular season to help you with your fantasy matchups. All customers right now have this CeeDee Lamb free pick in their lobby. All customers have this 30% profit boost in their lobby. Underdog is going crazy with these promos. They have a promo every single day this week, as you guys can see on the screen, and the 30% profit boost plus the CeeDee Lamb free pick is going pretty much for tonight's game with the Patriots and the Jets. So definitely check that out if you're interested. Like I said, tail my entry if you guys want. Danny also put out a short of a pick'em entry for Thursday Night Football tonight, so definitely check that out as well. Check out Flock Fantasy for all of our updates. Our rest of season rankings have been updated. Our weekly rankings are live right now. All of that good stuff is available on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE for 7 days for free. 30% off any of the packages, 6 months for free when you sign up annually. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.